Hi.
Namaskar.
Hi, Chetna. Hi, Apeksha.
Hi.
Welcome to this session of literati, and a huge welcome to our wonderful audience also, and our guest authors. So it's Saturday night, and before the pandemic, if you've been to a multiplex movie, you remember the last rocking number at the fag end of the movie? So we are going to try to be that rocking number at the fag end of day 2. And to rock it for us, we have Rajesh Talwas and Apeksha Rao. Hello to both of you.
Hi. Hi, Rajesh. Hi, Chetna.
Hi. Hi. Hi.
And less writers for young adults we thought of as non-serious writers. So we are going to do some serious talking first, and at the end we will have a fun round. So all the viewers also stay tuned in for a wonderful fun round at the fag end. Let's begin with Rajesh ji, only because he's a senior in his writing career. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, okay, Rajesh ji. A lawyer and, with the UN peacekeeping mission and having straddled, various extremes of the writing spectrum from non-fiction as serious as writing about the Nirbhaya case to, coming to detective fiction. So please tell us, how did this journey happen to this book, The Fabulous Four?
Thank you, Chetna. Uh, I should say that, I've always been interested in writing, but unfortunately, in India, people still don't consider writing to be a career. I say this because in between assignments, I was out of a job. I've been working with the UN for the last 20 years, but in between, I was out of a job for 6, 8 months. And somebody came and said, "So, what are you doing these days?" I said, "I'm writing a book." He said, "Oh, that's all well and good. But what are you doing?" So, meaning that writing is not taken seriously in India as yet. And hopefully, that is set to change. Uh, Young adult fiction, which Apeksha is targeting, did not exist in my days when I was growing up. It was just children's books. So my idea was really that having been to so many colonized nations, but I found everybody's reading Enid Blyton, Secret Seven. I thought, well, why don't we have a non-Western kind of children's adventure series? So my children, the Fabulous Four, they are taken from different parts of India, but in a sense, they represent different races of the world. So, so that's the background, and I really, really like.
So we come to more of that. Well, let me tell the viewers that we have two stories fitted here. One story has a protagonist called Princess Samara, and the other story has a protagonist called Samira Joshi. So the names are also pretty similar. And if I may use a food analogy, you know how we Indians are foodies, so I love using food analogies. So Rajesh Ji's protagonist, Samara, uh, and his story could probably be described as a Subway sandwich, which has multicolored sauces, brown sauce, yellow sauce, and so it's like a Subway sandwich. And Apeksha's story could probably be seen as the KFC twister zinger. Twists and turns, and the twister wrap, which has so many multi layers in it, and is spicy, and you don't know where the twists and turns are going to take you. So today's session is all about a Subway sandwich meets the Zinger Twister. So now over to Apeksha, from a homeopath to full-time author of spy fiction. So just, briefly tell us, our viewers, what is it about, your book, your
So,
sisterhood of stories.
yeah. So, Along Came a Spider is the story of a girl, a 17-year-old girl who wants to be a spy. And like a lot of other Indian parents, her parents want her to be a doctor. The problem is, Samira's parents are spies themselves. They work for Raw, and they have trained their daughter to be a spy. So she doesn't really understand why they're suddenly doing a U-turn, and why they don't want her to be a spy anymore. And while she's trying to figure this out, she stumbles upon a secret sisterhood of teenage spies, the Spyders, and she wants in. Whether the spiders want her is another question. And to find out whether they want her, you have to read the book.
Oh, great. Okay. So, Rajesh ji, so tell us more about where your book, The Fabulous Four is set, the setting. And as I mentioned, it seems like a Subway sandwich with so many sauces, in it. So please tell us about the multi-ethnicity and, cross-cultural influence in the book.
Well, my book is Princess Samara. She is very dark skinned. So possibly from the south of India, but then she could also represent the African continent, continent. And she meets these other three boys. One is from the hotlands, one is from wetlands, and one is from snowland. And all these have different climates. They are all fascinating places. You have wetlands where the children swim to school in the streets wearing certain kind of suits. So there's lots of fantasy, and they the child from the boy from snowlands is as white as a European. So you have different colors, different kinds of which could Tagore many years ago, he said that India is actually a microcosm of the world, and I think that's true. India's problems are a microcosm of the problems of the world, and India's people also, in a sense, represent the world. So we have, for example, these movies which are very popular, which are Western oriented, whether it's the Cinderella or it's Shrek or it's Harry Potter. But I think the time has come where the global audience has shifted. For example, Disney now they made something for the Chinese audience. But now if you have a multi-ethnic children's story, that is really going to hit people's touch the buttons, because people from Africa, from Europe, from China, different parts of the world can relate to it. You see this happening in adult cinema, and I think it can happen with children's films as well as children's books, because it's very nice to have warm scenes of children eating scones, but Westerners will also like to hear about children eating jalebis. It will
Yeah,
seem exotic for
I
kids.
read in your book that your princess is eating dalia for breakfast,
Correct, correct, correct.
So, okay. We'll come to that, the Indianization of it a bit, later. Apeksha, uh, we have grown up on a couple of female, sleuths and spies, and who hasn't read Miss Marple or Nancy Drew, or to talk of the controversial spies Mata Hari, and more recently Sehmat from the book Calling Sehmat by Sikhaji. So, what was it, that inspired your own sisterhood of spies? And tell us more about who are the other, protagonists in this sisterhood, and how have you characterized them, differently?
So, to be honest, I think when I started writing Along Came a Spider, I think I channelized my own teenage fantasies of being a spy. So, when I was a teenager, I really wanted to be a spy, and that obviously never happened. So, when I started writing, somehow that came up in the story, that fantasy started cropping up, and I realized I liked the idea of a teenager being a spy. Why not? I mean, it seems very far fetched, but what's to stop teenagers from doing something? And what's to stop an intelligence agency from recruiting them? Because if you go to see, teenagers are the most ignored demographic, and they're actually very resourceful, they're very smart, and they have access to technology that most of us can't even understand. I mean, they just with a snap of their fingers they can master technology. So that's how I started thinking about it. And I initially started writing about Samira Joshi. As I started writing about her, the other characters started cropping up. So you have Samira, who's a born spy. I mean, it runs in her blood. It's in her genes. From her great grandmother, who was a really nosy person in Ratnagiri, in her village, to her grandmother, who used to solve small crimes like missing servants and runaway husbands and the like,
Okay.
to her
Okay.
parents who are elite spies. It runs in the Joshi genes. And she meets up with the Spyders, all of whom are teenagers. So you have Tina, who leads all their missions. She's from an orphanage. Then you have Debbie, who's a genius. She's a resident genius. She's a hacker and an inventor. And you have Sweetie, who's a martial arts expert. And you also have Millie, who's the youngest in the group, but she's an explosives expert. So those are my girls, my spiders. And
Okay. So that's your sisterhood of spies. Okay, Rajesh, I'm intrigued by the title. What's with this Zoozoo? You know, it's such a tongue twister. So we remember only the Vodafone Zoozoo. So tell us what's with this title. I mean, how did it happen? The Zoozoo visit.
It's of course young a young team from the East with Eastern storytelling magic. And in many of our Eastern stories, there is a villain. And Zoozoo, the wizard, is this villain, this great villain, who's very tall, who has, uh, you know, lizard-like things coming down his face. And he has a sister called the Churail, who's also very deadly. And these four team up. They have to circumvent various obstacles. And as a child, when growing up, I used to have aunts and sisters telling me stories. They were full of these obstacles, that these obstacles had to be surmounted, and then you could get to actually uh, smashing the villainy of the evil people. So there are all kinds of uh, magical twists. There is a flying falcon, whom I've called Khabar. So,
Yeah.
some of the names have been chosen keeping these things in mind. Uh, yes. And Samara, which is very similar, as you say, to Samira. So, Samara meets Samira in this session. Uh,
Okay.
so, Samara is got a little more coverage as compared to the boys. I guess it's because otherwise it's not very gender balanced. There are three boys and one girl. But she is, in a sense, not exactly the leader, but she has a slightly more primary role, one could
Okay.
say. And so if you see the cover, you have Samara. There's this horse, which is the fastest horse in the world, Barado, and Samara is mounted on it, and the three boys are behind her. Their relationship is very different, as some reviewers uh, mentioned. They said they're all authentic Eastern characters, and how they relate to each other is also different from how Western children relate to each other, to make it more authentic. So that's a bit more about it. Uh, thank you.
Okay. 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 So, Apeksha, I'm intrigued by the, you know, uh, we've grown up on Bond movies and we were always fascinated by the, latest gizmos and gadgets and those racy cars. So I'm intrigued by the gizmos and gadgets you've imbued to your characters. So just tell us very briefly. So some of the creative gizmos that you've created for your book and you've given to your protagonists.
So, essentially, most of the gadgets and gizmos that they use, they're basic ones like tracking devices and parabolic mics, microphones, which catch, you can catch audio from quite a bit of distance. But one gizmo that Debbie, the inventor, invents, so she keeps trying her hand at inventing stuff that her friends can use. So one of the freaky things she comes up with is a pair of bionic lips, which if suppose you're stuck in a tight situation and you have the lips, you can just put it, hold the stick in your mouth, and you can use it. So they're prehensile, bionic lips, which are prehensile. So you can, they work independently of each other. So you can use them as fingers. So, but of course, her friends are not very fond of it. But yeah, so that's the kind of. So
Those
there's a
are
bit of freedom to, you can let your imagination loose, and you can just come up with whatever
yeah.
uh, you can think of.
Did you do a lot of research to come up with all these, fancy gadgets? And, did you see a lot
A
of
bit.
Bollywood, Bollywood movies also for that?
A bit. Actually, a lot of research has gone into the book, so that was part of the research.
Okay, okay. So Rajesh ji, coming to you again. Uh, what about children's literature or literature for young adults? I wouldn't even call it children's literature because a lot of youngsters are reading these stories about sleuths and spies. So, what's your take on the are publishers willing to publish YA stories, or do you face a lot of challenges, if you want go to them with a, story for young adults?
Well, thanks, Chetna. Before I answer your question, just to add
Yeah.
that my book doesn't have so many gadgets, but it does have something called an Uran Khatola. So
Put it-
Huh.
Zoozoo is traveling
Okay.
everywhere in an
Hmm,
Uran Khatola, and he
hmm,
discusses with his sister that I
hmm.
was thinking of calling it a Marcotola. Then I thought of a Chevrotola, but then I finally settled on Uran Khatola. So
Okay.
that's the only main gadget. But to come to your question, I think
Yeah.
it's a very interesting question. Actually, just 2 days ago, I published something in the Times of India about how India is the home of the folk tale. All the folk tales in the world have actually originally, or most of them, have traveled from India. So, but the folk tales in the West got published before we had our tales published, because, for example, the Grimm's tales were Grimm's was the brothers were scouting around for folk tales 2,000 years after the Jatak tales, and we have very ancient tales which have traveled in different languages to different parts of the world. So we are actually the home, and this is Western scientists, social scientists, who accept that we are the home of the fairy tale. But that, paradoxically enough, has limited our publishers. So they want to keep publishing the Panchatantra, Akbar, Birbal, and they're not willing to uh, do
Right.
innovative things, and just do the tried and tested things. So uh, I think it's a shame, actually, that globally filmmaking for children is dominated by the West, and there's no reason, because we have such a huge corpus. The reason is that partly because publishers are cowardly the world over. But I would say that maybe in India they're a little more cowardly. So it's not easy to find a publisher, uh, and they're stuck still on Akbar Birbal, Panchatantra, Jatak Tales, Tenali Ram. So that's wonderful. Those are fantastic stories. But we also need to give something to today's child to relate to, something which is adapted to the times. And I think things will change. Things are changing. I mean, your festival is a sign of the changing times. And I hope that publishers will become more open uh, to children's literature, because it's so important.
Yeah. So carrying on with that point about the indigenization, the Indianization of the, detective narrative. So, you must have been asked umpteen times, your book, is it like the famous five or the secret seven, the staples from the Enid Blyton, stable. So, what do you say about the Indianization of detective fiction on the whole in India, and about your own specific story? So when you started out, did you have this brief in mind that I have to do something different from Famous Five and Secret Seven? And tell us about that.
That's for Rajesh ji, right?
For Rajesh ji, yeah. Rajesh ji, that was for you.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
yes. I think the indigenization. We have such a vast land, and so so there is a character from the hotlands where you can sort of put it into Rajasthan. There is a character from Snowland, which is can be like Kashmir, and and of course Princess Samara is very dark skinned. We have a large area, so I sometimes like to talk to my friends in the UN, and I say that we have in India people who are whiter than the whites and darker than the Africans, or equally dark. So we have so much diversity here, and we have such a rich culture. Um, I mean, relatively speaking, I've traveled all across Europe. I think India is culturally much more diverse compared to Europe. Europe is much more homogeneous, and so is the United States. So even when you indigenize, there are actually so many regional choices you can take, you can make. But Apeksha may want to add on, because I think the address question was also in a way addressed to her.
Yeah, we come to her also. So, Apeksha, when you were doing your spy story, grown up on so much of spy fiction and non-fiction also. You told me, you know. So did you have a very clear, brief in your mind that you want to create a indigenous narrative, an Indianized narrative, which should nowhere resemble, all that foreign detective or spy literature you've sort of, read up.
So when I first started writing, that was when I was a child. When I started writing short stories, my uncle gave me very good advice. He told me you should write what you know. So, so when as an adult, when I started writing my stories, I realized that I know this. I've been born and brought up in India. I've lived in India, and I know the areas around me. I know people around me. I know Indians. So I decided whatever I would write, whether it is spy fiction or any other genre that I write, I will write base my characters here. And so all my stories will always be based on Indian characters. And like my first book is based in Mumbai because I grew up in Mumbai. So
Okay.
so it's
Yeah.
all based on what I know. So
Okay.
I think
Okay.
that's the best way to write, because
That's the, best way to. And
yeah.
Apeksha, being a homeopath, so now of course you've given up your full-time practice as a homeopath. So did that background in any way help you in doing your spy story, or because remember Agatha Christie, she would bring in poisons, from daily food, could be a poison in the narrative. So do any homeopathic medicines qualify to poison?
No, homeopathic medicines don't qualify as poisons, thankfully. But what it did help me in is that there's a lot of case taking in homeopathy, and my experience with case taking helped me in building my characters. So that understanding of human nature that homeopathic practice gave me, that helped me build my characters better.
Okay. And I think now I need to, ask you both. And we'll start with Rajesh ji about the craft of, writing detective fiction or spy stories. So, how do you, Rajesh ji, approach, this craft of creating a detective story? And are you very structured about it? And do you do a lot of research? Or you draw upon your experiences. So tell us about the craft of it.
Well, mine is more of an adventure story, but and it took me many years to write, but actually, uh, I started it about 6 years ago. But then I wrote something and then I put it aside and started something else. So a few books got published in the interregnum while I was working on this. Uh, and that's partly because uh, my job sometimes, because I'm working, it's easier for me to write nonfiction. It doesn't require me to go into another imaginary world. So finding the time to do that. So it took quite a bit of time. I have to say that uh, some writers, they work out everything in advance, and right from the middle, this is going to happen, that is going to happen, this will be the end, and then they start writing. And others just go um, by
The flow.
instinct,
Mhm.
but with the flow. Yes.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
in some of my writings, in fact, with most of my plays, I already know everything. But the Fabulous Four was an instinctive ride. I didn't know where it was going. I didn't know where the story would take me, where the characters would take me. So it was more in the inspirational mode. So I think uh, it's it depends on the genre, uh, how exactly you approach it. Um, but you, Chetna, you yourself have been writing, and so you understand this very
yeah.
well.
I
And
started out with a book for children and young adults, and it's called Veggies Go on a Beauty Parade. And the time in which when I wrote it was a different time with a different readership. And I think it was more of a spontaneous narrative. It was not a structured narrative. So, yes, I can relate to, your writings for young adults. So now let's hear it from Apeksha about your craft of, writing science fiction.
I'm a plotter. I need to plot. Yeah, I'm out and out a plotter. So
Structured, right.
even Along Came a Spider was plotted out.
Okay.
So maybe not like not every little detail, but the chapters and how I expected the book to go. So
Yeah.
I had that plotted out
Okay. So
because that then gives me it cuts out a lot of stress. It then it leaves me free to uh,
yeah.
write better.
Yeah, yeah. So you sort of have a blueprint and detailed, maybe scene by scene, structure.
Yeah, sometimes, yeah, scene by scene.
Okay, okay. Uh, so, uh, so I think we've convinced our viewers that the writers for young adults can do some serious talking. So we're convinced about that writers for young adults could be taken seriously. I hope so. And so now we can go on to a bit of fun round. And so please fasten your seat belt, get your pen and paper ready. And
Oh,
as for the audience also, so please fasten your seat belts, and the audience can also participate in the fun round. And wherever you want to give your smart replies, you're most welcome to. So here's heading into the round called Quirky Quickies. I don't know if it's
yeah,
so
it's
that's
visible.
Quirky round. And so this is a rapid fire round, and we'd like our authors to maybe just scribble the answers at the same time so that the viewers can see it. and the audience is most welcome, and they're invited to join in with their funny, wacky, quirky replies. So please,
Chetna,
yeah,
can I write on my phone? Is that okay?
sure, sure.
Yeah.
You can even write it on your phone or say it out, whatever you're comfortable with. Okay,
All right. Yeah.
so here we go. Ready, get, set,
One sec.
go.
New
Okay,
document. New document.
okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
the first question of quirky quickies to both of you and to the audience. If your protagonist, Samara or Samira, bumped into Miss Marple, so what's the cheesy one-liner that she would say? You can speak it out also. You think, to,
Elementary, my dear Miss Marple.
huh?
Elementary, my dear Miss Marple.
Okay. So, Rajesh, let's have it from you also.
I'm not sure if you can see.
You
Would
have
you
to say
like
it
a cup?
out.
Would
Would
you like
you?
a cup of tea? Would you like a cup of tea?
Okay, so your protagonist would invite Miss Marple for a cup of tea. Okay, great. And anything from the audience? I'll keep reading out, the responses as they come along. Okay. Uh, coming to our next, Principal Bhupender says, uh, she'll say Sherlock Holmes. Okay, I think that was in
She's mixed
response
it
to,
up.
to,
Yeah, yeah.
okay. So, any more answers from the audience? What would one of the protagonists say to Miss Marple, the one cheesy one-liner? Okay, so here's to the second one. Apeksha and Radeshji. What's the smartest or silliest bit of snooping or sleuthing that you have ever done in your life? Maybe just say it in one, line.
Facebook
Can
stalking.
you done? What's that?
Facebook, stalking people on Facebook.
Okay,
That
that's
everybody does that. So
a done thing, these days. And what about Rajesh ji? He
What
looks the
I,
proper, the proper. Really, I mean, he would have been proper about everything.
well, I remember trying to figure out which of my five cousin sisters had eaten up my chocolate many years ago. Yeah, which?
Okay, so that's the bit
Yeah,
of snooping around you
yeah.
did. Okay. Okay, so moving on to the next. So, most of your fiction, especially Apekshas, are set in, contemporary times. So, the one way in which the millennial, sleuths or spies in fiction are better than the spies of yesteryear.
sorry, I didn't get that.
One way in which the millennial,
Current spy.
fictional
Yeah.
spies or sleuths are better than the fictional sleuths of yesteryear.
They have better gadgets.
Yeah, better gadgets. Rajesh ji?
Yes, I think the the network, the having a global network of collaborators, associates, informers, friendly spies
Okay.
become easier.
Okay. And we have one of our viewers writing in, Indu Balachandran, says the bit of snooping she has done is eavesdropping on restaurant conversations of couples.
Oh,
Oh,
nice.
that's
Nice.
interesting. I'm sure she's come up with a whole lot of stories to tell from that.
You go
Okay.
and do.
Yeah. Okay, so now moving on to the next one. So, conversely, what is the one thing that the spies or the detectives of today's fiction don't have, which the spies of old time fiction have? One thing which the older spies had, and the today's fictional spies don't have.
The personal touch. The personal
Okay,
touch. Because
yeah,
earlier, you had to follow people, you had to do surveillance in person. You had to follow people around. Today, you can sit sit at home on your phone, you can know who's going where and doing what. You don't need the personal touch as much.
Yeah,
And
what I would
Rajesh,
say, yeah, is that the older spies were also great psychologists, and
yes, yes, very
maybe the
true.
modern day one that may not have so
Yeah, yeah.
much.
So we have our viewers also writing in. We have Narinderjeet Kaurji saying the older, spies had mental sharpness. And Indu Balachandran again says, yes, the personal touch. And okay, so that's interesting responses coming in. Okay, one uh, and Principal Bhupender says fanciful imagination is something the older spies had. And Sheila B. Rao says natural
That's my
deduction.
mom. That's
Oh,
my
that's your
mom.
mom. Okay. So she says natural powers of deduction. And okay, so moving on to the next question. One Videshi spy book and one Desi spy book you think deserves a Booker Prize.
Book applies. Okay. Uh, Videshi Stella Remington, because I really love her books.
Your books,
And
okay.
yeah, and Vikram Sood's book on there's forget the name of it. It's about it's based on ISI. Vikram Sood has written one book, so
Okay,
that's really
okay.
good, non-fiction.
Rajesh, what's your
Yeah,
choice?
well, I would say one of the Feludas. Uh, mm,
Oh,
which
yes.
is,
How did I not mention the Filidas? With
so
Samitra passing away recently. Yeah,
yeah, that would be my vote for.
the
And
Filuda books by Satyajit Ray. Okay. Okay, so now
So
that
sorry,
brings us
the Vikram Sood book is called The Unending Game. I just checked the name. So that has
Anand.
covered a lot of the Unending Game. That has
Okay,
covered a lot of the raw ISI thing, like
yeah,
how they
okay, okay, okay.
spied on
So
each
good,
other.
good, good. Okay, so now that brings us to the final, question of the rapid fire round called Quirky Quickies. Um, your protagonists are traveling in a plane, and the person sitting next to them taps them on the arm and says the name is Bond, James Bond. So what will your protagonist say to him?
Come up with a new dialogue, buddy.
Okay,
my kids would probably ask him, "Are you a wizard also?"
Zoozoo.
Learning magic.
Okay, okay, okay. And so we have writers writing in Nishant Srivastavji. I think he's saying unending game. So that's his response, I think, to the previous question. And we have Principal Bhupender writing in. All three of us have a huge issue. So we're getting very good response. So, okay. So before we sign off, one takeaway from each of you, like one thing a budding, spy fiction writer should do and should not do.
Do's and don'ts.
Yeah, one do and one don't.
Rajesh ji, go first, please.
Okay. I know
Well,
he's
I
been
would be
a senior writer.
based on my experience. I would say, don't give up your day job, because the jobs can also be very enriching, and you have lots of new experiences which you can then put into your fiction. So uh, by all means plunge into full-time writing, but see the economic possibilities. They are more today than they were yesterday, but they still may not be sufficient. So weigh your options. Uh,
Okay, so that's the takeaway from Rajesh. Over to your picture.
If you want to write, you have to read. My biggest advice to anyone who's an aspiring writer is read, read, read. In your genre, try out new genres, but you have to read.
Okay,
So that's
great. We have Narendrajit Kaur and Ritu Kumarji writing in very engrossing conversation. So this was a session of Subway sandwich meets the KFC ringer treat, two storytellers with spy and sleuth stories. And thank you so much for such an engaging conversation. And a huge thanks to our wonderful audience who always participate, with their generous comments and with their wacky and smart answers. So, wishing more power to your pen. And I hope having written one children's book, I'm able to write. I feel inspired by both of you, and I'm able to write another one. So, on that note, very good evening. So, I hope we rock this last, number or last section of this too. Thank you so much to all of you.
thank you, Chetna. Thank you, Rajesh ji, and thank you, Literati, for having us on. It was
Thanks,
really
Thank you.
lovely.
Apeksha. Thanks, Chetna. It was a wonderful session, and I think last is sometimes, we have the desert for last, so we were probably the desert. So
Dessert. Yes. Okay. So the laughs were the dessert. And on that note, wishing you all more dessert. And we have Indu Balachandran and Principal Bhupinder and Nishant Srivastava ji all routing in that they all enjoyed this session. So
Thank
thank you
you.
to all and thank you to our wonderful audience and our cheerleaders.